2.
Hello everyone, my name is Romina.
Hey guys, my name is Zach.
And welcome to Randall Museum's Ocean Party. Today we'll be talking about how important our ocean is and the animals that live in it. We have 4 different tanks we'll be talking about in the 5 habitats we have. And we'll talk about the animals, do some fun experiments, and much more that you can do at home. But first of all, what is a habitat, Zach?
That's a great question. First off, we're so lucky to live in the San Francisco Bay Area where we're surrounded by different habitat types, from the oceans to the mountains and all in between. Today specifically, we're talking about the areas that plants and animals are going to live in, especially those that live in our marine environments or marine habitats.
Exactly. And the first habitat we're going to be talking about is our tide pool. So let's take a look. So, for our first habitat, we have our tide pools, where the land meets the sea. And here we have a couple of the animals that you can find there. The star of the show, of course, is going to be our sea star. And if you take a look over here, you can see our sea star is in our tank. Now this animal is also known as a starfish, but if you take a look at it, it's not really a fish at all. It's actually a part of the echinoderm family, or spiny skin. And you can see some of the smaller spines that this animal has to protect itself from harsh waves when it's up in the tides, or from other animals down below. These animals are really cool, but they are a little bit different than what we think of as animals. They don't have eyes where they could see colors and shapes, but they do have eyes to see light and dark. And they do that with the tips of their arms on the smaller parts that we call 2 feet. Their 2 feet are also what they use to move around the ocean floor. And what makes it really cool is that those 2 feet can actually taste and sense what they're eating. So let's see if we can see this piece of shrimp get grabbed by the sea star and move through its 2 feet. These animals do move really slowly, but living in the tide pools, you have to make sure you are pretty resilient to not only living under harsh conditions under the water, but even under the bright sun, as half of the time the tide is covered with water or not. Not only that, ooh, you can actually see the sea star picking up the shrimp. Isn't that cool? The sea star uses hundreds of 2 feet underneath to move across the ocean and to find its food. Now, it might take a while for this sea star to grab the shrimp, but once it has it in its arms, it'll bring it to the center of its body on the underside of this animal. And instead of chewing it like we would chew our food, they don't really have a mouth to do so. So they actually will spit their stomachs out to get their food into their bellies. Isn't that cool? Now, this isn't the only animal that's here in our tide pool tank, but we also have our sea urchins. And our sea urchins are also in that spiny skin family. Here we have a purple sea urchin, and you can see the spines. But if I put my finger right here, you can see the movement of these spines as it's sensing what it's being touched. Now, obviously, because I'm not food, those spines are gonna go in, sense that I'm not yummy, and then spread back out. Just like the sea star, the sea urchin has spines and 2 feet in order to move around the ocean. But instead of eating things that contain meat, like the sea star would, the sea urchin will actually eat pieces of seaweed. It's one of their favorite things to eat. And let's see if we can watch them move their spines and sense the piece of seaweed I'm putting next to it. It might take a little bit longer because, you know, this animal may or may not want to be eating at this moment. But as soon as this animal grabs onto this food, it'll bring it back to the underside, just like the sea star, towards its beak, which they use to break the pieces of seaweed apart before ingesting it. Now, the last animal that we have here to talk about that's related to the sea star and the sea urchin is the sea cucumber. It is also an echinoderm, but we don't really have one of them here as they are a really different animal. Just like the sea urchin, they have spines, but their spines are pretty soft, so they aren't very tough. Now, what also makes the echinoderm family really unique is that they can actually regenerate parts of their body. And the way that the sea cucumber protects itself is that when an animal grabs the sea cucumber, it'll spit out its insides and trick the predators into thinking that this is the food, so the sea cucumber can get away. Now, there are lots of other cool things that we have living in our tide pools. Isn't that right, Zach?
Absolutely. The tide pools are such a wonderful ecosystem because it houses so many different types of species of animals. Let's talk about some other ones we have here at the Randall Museum. The first one here, we can all see, is this wonderful plant or flower. But the flower just grabbed me. It is actually not a plant or a flower, but a living thing. If you guys go tide pooling here in the Bay Area, you guys might encounter this amazing and common animal called the sea anemone. You can see his tentacles are moving around. Sea anemones are the type of animals called the cnidarians, much like the jellyfish. A single sea urchin is actually called a polyp. What they do after they disperse, they will kind of land on a rock or another feature and kind of start their life from there. Sea urchins use their tentacles to catch their prey. As you can see here, it's actually going to be grabbing onto my finger, kind of sensing if I am food or not. Let's try feeding this sea urchin here to see how that actually works. I have here a piece of shrimp, the French fry of the marine world. Everyone eats shrimp. They're delicious. Let's hope this guy will eat some shrimp right now. As you can see, this sea anemone, not urchin, I said urchin, this sea anemone has wrapped around its prey and is going to bring it towards the middle of it where it will be digested. These tentacles actually have stinging little cysts in them. Certain species, like this anemone here, does not affect humans, but it will definitely affect smaller animal prey. Moving on to something with a backbone, there are vertebrates that live in the tide pools. And if you can imagine, if you're a marine vertebrate, you're most likely going to be a fish. We're going to talk about one of the few fish species we have here at the Randall Museum, and quite a common one found in the tide pools here in the San Francisco Bay Area. If we look into this tank here, we will see a sculpin. I'm going to point at him with these forceps here. Oop. Sculpins are a really diverse family of fish found both in marine habitats as well as freshwater and brackish waters. What's very interesting about sculpin is that they're typically a benthic animal, meaning they live most of their lives on the sea floor or rocky intertidal floors. This being the case, sculpins tend to be really good with their camouflage. They tend to blend in with the rocks around them or the different kind of algae and colors that are present in their habitats. Another fun fact about sculpins here, if I can get them to move out here, is that despite the fact that they can swim quite well, they actually use their pectoral fins, which are the fins located on the bottom or the ventral surface of their bodies, to suction themselves to the ground and to actually walk, if you will, on the sea floor. This allows them to find little crevices to hide under and also find their favorite foods, which may be other fish or smaller invertebrates living in the ocean. At this time, I think that we should show the viewers how a sculpin would walk by doing our sculpin dance.
Exactly. So, in order for us to know how a sculpin moves, we're going to go call one of our friends from the Randall Museum, Nathan, to come and join me. Hi, Nathan.
Hi.
Awesome. So, to move like a sculpin, we're going to put our hands up by our shoulders and tuck our elbows in. And we're going to be wiggling our tops side to side and move our legs as high as we can with high knees. And this is how we dance like a sculpin. Come try it with us. Sculpin dance, sculpin dance. Awesome. Alrighty, everyone. Great job. Give yourselves a round of applause. Now, let's turn it back to Zach and learn about our next habitat, the salt marsh. Zach?
Welcome back to our talk about the different habitat types and marine animals we have here in the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as what we have here as specimens at the Randall Museum. Now we've moved from the intertidal zone into a really unique habitat type found here in the San Francisco Bay Area called the salt marsh. Salt marshes are really, really interesting areas because actually where salt water from the sea might come up during the tides and kind of flood over places that are generally brackish or fresh water. These areas have, as you can see in this photo, lots of vegetation that are actually found on land. These areas get flooded with salt water, bringing in different types of wildlife into this area. We will talk about some of the more common fish that you can find here in these salt marshes, like the sand dab. Sand dabs are a really interesting species of fish because they're a member of the flatfish family, kind of like the halibut and other flounders that you might find here in the Pacific Ocean. We have quite a few of these little guys hanging around here, but they're really well camouflaged. So look carefully and see if you can see these guys swimming around on the sea floor. Their dorsal or top surface is going to look just like the sand or the substrate that they live on, while their ventral surface, their bellies, are going to be bright white, which actually helps them when they're swimming up the different trophic levels to kind of hide from different predators. You can watch this one swimming back here, going up and down. Sand dabs are one of the prime predators found in the salt marshes, where they feed on a lot of smaller crustaceans, such as shrimp, crabs, as well as small little fish that may use these salt marshes as a nursery of sorts. You can see these fish are going up and down level, and most fish, actually some sculpins don't have one, but most fish have something called a swim bladder, which allow them to kind of swim up and down. We're going to actually have Romina show you how a swim bladder works.
Exactly. Now we're going to go over to our science experiment table and show a little demonstration on how fish are affected by the pressures deep below. Now what's really cool is that our oceans are really, really deep, and we have yet barely explored the surface of our waters. And some animals who are at the very bottom have not yet been discovered. But part of the way that they're allowed and able to do so is using their swim bladder, just like Zach said. Now here I have a water bottle with a tiny pipette and a weight to keep the bottom of the pipette facing downward. But if you can see, there is a nice air bubble in that pipette. This air bubble acts like the swim bladder, and when I squeeze the bottle, you can see it fall down. But if you can tell, it takes a lot of energy for the pipette to stay somewhere either in the middle or even just at the very bottom. But you can play around with this experiment yourself at home, and I'll show you how. So grab an old liter bottle like this and fill it up all the way with water. Next, grab a pipette and a nut. And what you're going to do is put the nut on the pipette. You might need an adult to do this because it can be a little tricky. Once you have that on there, use the pipette by squeezing it first and then placing the tip in the water. Let go, and about halfway through it, there should be water in your pipette. Once you have this, go ahead and take a pair of scissors and cut off the tip. You might make a little bit of a mess, but that's okay. Once you have your pipette nice and ready, drop it inside your bottle with the nut facing down and close the cap as tightly as you can so you don't spill any water. Now all you have to do is squeeze. Play around with how much water or how much air is in your pipette and see how hard it actually is to squeeze this bottle all the way down so that pipette goes down and up. Another thing you can try to do is see how long you can hold the bottle so the pipette stays exactly in the middle. It can be a lot harder than you think. But let's go ahead and swim back to the surface onto the beaches to our next tank. We're going to be exploring the sandy beach habitat we have here. And when you're on the beach, you normally see people, you see the water, and sometimes you see this cool animal here. A lot of times people will collect these things thinking that they're a rock or some sort of cool fossil, but in fact this is an animal called a sand dollar. And even though this animal isn't alive like this, they are alive when they tend to look purple like the ones we have in this habitat here. Sand dollars are also a part of the echinoderm family. Even though they don't have spines to protect themselves, they still have plenty of tube feet, and that's what gives them that purple color that you see here. Instead of traveling around and finding food, these animals are filter feeders, so they really depend on the waves coming and going to bring them their nutrients. They don't move very far across, but they do move up and down as the water is coming in and out. And then they take those tiny particles called plankton and bring it to the backside where their mouths are, which you can see on this one that is no longer alive here. Now, this is one of the cool things that you can find on the beach, but we do have one more tank we can talk about, and that is our bay and estuary tank with our coworker, Zach.
Hey guys, so now we're going to talk about another really interesting habitat type that we found here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and this would be the estuaries. Estuaries are really interesting areas where fresh water actually kind of comes out and mixes in with the salt water, maybe through a stream or a creek that pours out into salt water. In these areas, there are a lot of smaller, kind of hidden animals that hide within the eelgrass and other vegetation and algae that you will find in the estuary. The first animal we'll talk about here is a really, really interesting species called the pipefish. Hopefully you guys can see it right here. And try to see him. He's camouflaged really well within the eelgrass here. Do you guys see the pipefish? I kind of see him. The pipefish, probably called a pipefish because of its elongated body and its long little snout, is related to the seahorses. These fish actually have a hard, bony outer exoskeleton, not really an exoskeleton, but a hard, bony outside. And he's swimming in right here. So, and also like a seahorse which has the bony exoskeleton, they also have different types of different breeding than compared to other fish. The males will actually hold the babies in them and kind of wait for them to hatch and release them, just like seahorses. Let's try feeding one of these pipefish here, and you can notice how these specific fish will eat. I'm slowly pipetting some brine shrimp in front of this pipefish, and as you can notice, this fish cannot open its jaws quite wide. It's actually using a suction to capture all these little brine shrimp. Another awesome species we have here in the estuaries are going to be the black-eyed gobies that you might see on the sea floor. These goby are really interesting fish, much like the sculpin. They can actually use the pectoral fins to kind of walk across the sea floor, sensing for food items such as small invertebrates and other tiny little fish. These fish blend in really well with their surroundings, as evident by their kind of pale coloration. They kind of match really well to the sandy bottoms. And from here, we're going to send it back to Romina to talk about some deeper waters.
So, one of our last habitats that we will talk about today is our open ocean. And because our open oceans are obviously very large, we don't really have a tank to support that here. We'll be talking about the skeleton we have. Now, the skeleton is a California sea lion, one of the more well-known marine mammals we have here living in the bay. A marine mammal is a mammal that is really unique as it has certain adaptations to allow it to live in such harsh, cold environments. So, when we think about marine mammals, we can think of the word whale. Warm-blooded, hair or fur, air-breathing, live birth, or eats and drinks milk at some point in its life. And that's kind of how we can remember that these animals are a little bit different than the fish and other things that we talked about earlier. Now, this marine mammal is really unique as it's a San Francisco icon. And part of what makes it so famous is that Pier 39 has docks with them that they get to rest on and relax. These animals can be found all along the California coast and have really cool fun facts, like the fact that they can hold their breath for 20 minutes. I don't know about you, but I can only hold my breath for maybe 10 before I start getting dizzy. The next cool thing that these animals have is the fact that they can swim over 800 feet below sea level, dealing with a lot of pressure that the fish have to deal with. Now, part of the way that they can do this is because the bones that they have on their ribs, which is right here, are not just bone, but they're made of cartilage, like your nose and your ears. That cartilage is really flexible. That's how we're able to flex our ears and move around our nose, and how these ribs will bend with the pressure of the deep waters. Not only that, but if you've ever been swimming in the Pacific Ocean, it gets really cold. So the way that these animals protect themselves is with a nice layer of blubber. But let's go ahead and show that experiment with our friends Nathan and Nancy and a bowl of water. So here we have our bowl of water, and to simulate and to replicate how cold that water is, we're going to dump some ice. So now that we know that it's nice and icy in our waters, we can see that it's cold. Are you guys ready to get your hands wet? Well, you don't have to get them wet. We have plastic baggies that you're going to use as your wetsuits. But Nathan will pretend he is a human, just like us, without a thick layer of blubber, while Nancy will pretend to be a sea lion, and we'll be using Crisco as our layer of blubber. So go ahead and stick your hand in that. This can be a little bit messy, just so we know, parents. And on the count of 3, we're going to go ahead and stick both hands in the water at the same time, holding it for about 10 seconds. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Whoa.
It's cold, huh? So we're waiting, and while we're waiting, we're going to also be getting these thermometers ready so we can show you how cold their hands will get after this experiment.
Oh, for goodness sake.
3, 2, 1. Take your hands out, and go ahead and take off your plastic bags as well. Now we're going to read both of your hands. And we're going to check it until it does the thing that I want it to do. There you go. So it took a while to get the right temperatures, but if we take a look, the one Nancy had, you can actually read the temperatures pretty close to a human being's temperature because she had that layer of blubber to protect it. While Nathan's is so low that the thermometer won't even read it. And this is how and why it's important for these animals to be very large and blubbery, as it gets really, really cold in the Pacific Ocean. Thanks, guys. Awesome. Now, sea lions are really amazing animals, and they do a lot of different adaptations and behaviors that helps us understand what they're doing. For example, they will raise their heads up in the sky when they get a little too cold so they can feel the sun rays warming up their blood. And when they get too hot after all that swimming and hunting for 20 pounds of food, they'll actually stick their flipper up in the air to get the breeze to cool themselves down. Not only that, but then they'll rest for days or hours. And that's what makes it really cool to see and share the experience of viewing them at Pier 39. Now, we learned a lot, but I think it's time for some questions and answers. Zach, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Hey guys, so it looks like we got quite a few questions on our live stream, particularly about the pipefish. So let's talk about some pipefish really quick. The first question we got asked is, why are pipefish so long? That's really based on the idea of probably the evolution of that species. Animals like to adapt their bodies to kind of the habitat type they're going to eventually be living in. Now I'm looking at the right camera, talking about the evolution of fish. In the grand scheme of life, things are going to have to adapt to their surroundings and live, and kind of live their lives the way that they have to. Pipefish are long because they're going to be adapted to be living and hiding within the reeds and the eelgrass of their habitat type. Another question we had involved how often do pipefish eat? Here in captivity, here at the Randall Museum, we feed our pipefish roughly about twice a day throughout most of the week. Usually fish have a high metabolism, especially if you're eating such small animals like brine shrimp. You're going to need more of that stuff to sustain yourself. And I think we had another question that I'm going to try to see. I'm far away.
Tiffany has a
Oh,
question.
there's a question on the phone.
Tiffany wants to know who likes to eat sea lions?
Who likes to eat sea lions? We have a lot of predators in the oceans, and one of them being the great white shark, which feed readily on sea lions as well as the elephant seals found kind of residing here in the San Francisco Bay Area and breeding down south, probably near the Año Nuevo, Santa Cruz area. Do we have some more questions? Do we have some more questions?
Yeah.
That Romina might want to help answer as well.
Yeah. So what's one of?
We're going to play some recorded questions.
Okay.
Okay.
How long do sea lions live?
Sea lions typically live about 20 to 30 years. So that's a pretty long lifespan, if you ask me.
Do we have sea turtles in San Francisco?
The next question involves some of the coolest animals in the world, sea turtles, and if they reside here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Unfortunately, the waters here in the San Francisco Bay Area, the immediate area, is a bit too cold to support these marine pelagic reptiles, but you may find them down south in the Monterey Bay Area where it's slightly warmer and we get influence from warmer coastal waters coming up. There you might find the leatherback sea turtle, which is the largest of all the sea turtles. I think we have more questions.
Yeah.
Is that it? Yes.
We have another live question.
Here's
for
another
both
live
of you.
question.
It's from Aaron. He wants to know, why do sea lions hang out near each other on the rocks?
That's a good question that Romina here could probably answer.
Yeah, these animals are social creatures. If you've ever been to Pier 39, by the time you get to that area, you can already smell and hear them as they're continuously barking and communicating with each other. Just like you and I, we're pretty social animals where we like to hang out with our friends, catch up, and see what's going on. Anything else?
It looks like
Yeah?
it's time to have a word from our sponsors.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for the Randall Museum Ocean Party. We hope you had fun. We really enjoyed sharing, and we hope you can come visit us when things get better. In the meantime, you can support us and make more fun programs like this happen by going to www.randallmuseum.org and pressing the join or donate button. We could really use your help so that we can keep working with you. Thanks so much for coming today and joining us at the Randall Museum Ocean Party Online.
Alrighty, everybody. Thank you so much, and let's Sculpin dance out of here.
Okay.
Woo!